My parents gave my brother a car. I got a bike. Then I found out why. You know that feeling when you realize your parents have a favorite child? Yeah, I lived it. My 18th birthday arrived with a shiny new bike sitting in the driveway, wrapped in a red bow that felt more like a slap in the face than a gift. Just 6 months earlier, my older brother Jake turned 18 and got handed the keys to a brand new Honda Civic, complete with leather seats and that new car smell. I stood there staring at that bicycle, feeling my stomach twist into knots, wondering what I'd done to deserve being the second-rate kid in my own family. But here's the thing, what I discovered 3 months later about why they gave me that bike instead of a car would flip my entire world upside down, and trust me, you're not gonna see this coming. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment that started this whole mess. My brother Jake had always been the golden child in our family, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. He played varsity football, dated the prettiest girls in school, and somehow managed to charm every adult he met with that million-dollar smile of his. When he turned 18, my parents threw him this massive party with all his friends, catered food, and a DJ that had the whole neighborhood complaining about the noise. The grand finale of the night was when Dad walked him outside, and there it was, a gorgeous silver Honda Civic with a giant bow on top, gleaming under the streetlights like something out of a car commercial. I remember standing in the crowd of people, clapping along with everyone else, feeling genuinely happy for my brother, even though a tiny voice in the back of my head whispered that I'd never get anything like that. Mom had her arm around my shoulders, squeezing me tight as she watched Jake's reaction with tears in her eyes. "Your time will come too, sweetheart," she'd whispered to me, and I'd believed her, because why wouldn't I? These were my parents, the people who were supposed to love both their children equally, the ones who always preached about fairness and treating people right. I spent the next 6 months imagining what kind of car I'd get, scrolling through used car listings online, picturing myself driving to school instead of taking the bus like some freshman. Fast forward to my 18th birthday, and the energy couldn't have been more different. There was no big party, no DJ, no crowd of friends, just a small family dinner at home with my parents, Jake, and my grandmother. We had spaghetti, which is literally the cheapest meal my mom knows how to make, and a store-bought cake from the grocery store that still had the price sticker on the box. After we sang Happy Birthday and I blew out the candles, Dad cleared his throat in that serious way he does when he's about to make an announcement. "Son, we got you something special this year," he said, and my heart started racing because I thought this was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. He handed me an envelope, and inside were keys, but these weren't car keys, they were just regular house keys with a new keychain attached. "Come outside," Mom said with this weird, nervous smile on her face that should have been my first warning sign. We all walked out to the driveway where a mountain bike was leaning against the garage, a decent one sure, but still just a bike. It had gears and shock absorbers and everything, probably cost a few $100, but it wasn't a car. My face must have given away my disappointment because Dad immediately launched into this explanation about how bikes are more environmentally friendly, how the exercise would be good for me, how insurance and gas were so expensive these days. I stood there nodding, forcing a smile, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it couldn't beat properly anymore. Jake at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot and not making eye contact with me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. Was I not good enough? Did my parents love Jake more than they loved me? I'd always gotten good grades, never been in serious trouble, helped around the house without being asked. What more could they want from me? The rational part of my brain tried to convince me that maybe they really were just trying to be financially responsible, that maybe they'd overspent on Jake's car and couldn't afford another one. But the hurt part of me, the part that felt like it had been gut-punched, kept replaying every moment where Jake got something better, got more attention, got more love. I made a decision that night, lying there in the dark with tears I refused to let fall burning behind my eyes. I was going to prove I didn't need their fancy gifts or their approval. The next few weeks were rough, not going to lie. Every morning I'd ride that bike to school while Jake pulled out of the driveway in his Civic, waving at me like everything was perfectly normal. My friends asked questions, making jokes about how my parents must have forgotten cars existed, and I laughed along, even though each comment felt like a tiny knife between my ribs. I started picking up extra shifts at my part-time job at the local grocery store, saving every penny I could because I was determined to buy my own car. If my parents weren't going to treat me like I mattered, then I'd show them I didn't need them anyway. My grades stayed perfect, I kept my room clean, I did everything right. But there was this new distance between me and my parents that hadn't existed before, like an invisible wall had gone up that nobody knew how to tear down. About 2 months after my birthday, something weird started happening. I'd come home from work late at night and I'd hear my parents arguing in their bedroom, their voices low but intense in a way that made my stomach hurt. One night, I crept closer to their door and I heard my mom crying, actually sobbing, while my dad kept saying we had no choice over and over again. I couldn't make out the rest of the conversation, but whatever they were talking about, it was tearing them apart. Jake noticed it too, because one day he pulled me aside and asked if I knew what was going on with Mom and Dad. For once, the golden child looked genuinely worried, and I realized that whatever was happening in our house was bigger than just me feeling slighted about a birthday present. Things came to a head on a random Tuesday afternoon in late spring. I'd gotten off work early and came home to find my mom sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers spread out in front of her, tears streaming down her face. When she saw me, she quickly tried to wipe her eyes and shuffle the papers into a pile, but I'd already seen enough to know these were medical bills. Not just one or two, but dozens of them, with amounts that made my brain hurt trying to comprehend that many zeros. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. She looked at me for a long moment, and I watched her face crumble as she realized she couldn't hide it anymore. "Sit down, sweetheart," she said, her voice shaking. "There's something your father and I need to tell you." What she told me in that kitchen, with afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of kids playing outside, changed everything I thought I knew about my family. 2 years ago, she explained, she'd been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. They'd caught it early enough that treatment was possible, but the medical bills had been astronomical. Chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, medications, follow-up appointments that never seemed to end. Our insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough, and my parents had drained their savings, maxed out credit cards, taken out a second mortgage on the house just to keep her alive. By the time Jake's 18th birthday came around, they'd already committed to buying him that car, had put down a deposit months before her diagnosis and couldn't get the money back. My mom's hands were shaking as she reached across the table to take mine. She told me that when my birthday approached, they'd agonized for weeks about what to do, lying awake at night trying to figure out how to give me something meaningful without going into debt so deep they'd lose the house. The bike had been a compromise, a way to give me something nice while still being able to pay the minimum on their medical bills. "We wanted to tell you," she sobbed, her grip on my hands getting tighter. "But I didn't want you to spend your senior year worried about whether your mother was going to die. Didn't want you to feel guilty about us spending money on you when it could go toward keeping me alive." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking all the air from my lungs and making the room spin around me. I sat there completely frozen, my brain trying to process what she'd just told me. My mother had cancer. My parents weren't playing favorites. They were drowning in medical debt, choosing between their financial survival and their kids' happiness. All those nights I'd spent angry, feeling unloved and undervalued, they'd been lying awake trying to figure out how to keep our family together. The bike wasn't a statement about my worth. It was all they could afford while still keeping a roof over our heads. Shame washed over me so intensely I thought I might throw up right there at the kitchen table. How had I been so blind, so wrapped up in my own hurt feelings that I hadn't noticed my mother was fighting for her life? "I'm in remission now," Mom continued, wiping her eyes with a tissue that was already soaked through. "The doctors say the prognosis is good, that I responded well to treatment. But the bills, they don't stop just because the cancer does. She explained that they'd be paying off these medical debts for years, maybe decades, that every extra penny had to go toward keeping the creditors from coming after the house. My dad had taken on extra consulting work on weekends. She'd gone back to work part-time even though she was still exhausted from treatment, and they'd cut every possible expense from their budget. The guilt trip I'd been on, the silent treatment I'd been giving them, the way I'd been pulling away. She'd felt every bit of it like another weight on her already burdened shoulders. I started crying then, really crying, in a way I hadn't since I was a little kid. I cried for my mom and what she'd been through, for my dad who'd been carrying this burden while trying to stay strong for everyone. I cried for all the time I'd wasted being angry about a car when my mother had been fighting for her life. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She'd been trying to protect me, to give me one more year of being a carefree teenager before the weight of adult problems came crashing down. In trying to spare me pain, she'd accidentally caused a different kind of hurt, but I understood it now. Understood that everything they'd done came from a place of love, not favoritism. The conversation lasted for hours, with Dad coming home partway through and joining us at the table. They showed me the bills, explained their payment plans, laid out exactly how dire the financial situation had been. Jake had known some of it, they admitted, because he'd walked in on Mom during one of her chemo sessions and demanded answers. They'd sworn him to secrecy, not wanting to burden me during my senior year, and he'd carried that weight alone. Suddenly, all those uncomfortable looks he'd given me, the times he'd tried to reach out and I'd brushed him off, it all made sense. He'd been trying to bridge a gap without being able to tell me why the gap existed in the first place. That night marked a turning point in our family. I told my parents about the money I'd been saving from work, and instead of using it to buy my own car like I'd planned, I handed it over to help with the medical bills. It wasn't much, maybe a couple $1,000s, but the look on my mom's face made it worth more than any car ever could. We sat down as a family and created a budget, figuring out how everyone could contribute to getting out from under this crushing debt. Jake started paying rent on the car. Yes, paying our parents to drive the car they'd bought him. And I took on more hours at work. We canceled the cable, cut back on eating out, started shopping at discount grocery stores, did everything we could to stretch every dollar. But here's where the revenge part comes in. And trust me, it's not what you're thinking. About a month after this conversation, I was at school when I overheard some kids in my class talking about me. "Can you believe his parents gave him a bike for his 18th birthday?" One of them laughed. "Like, how much of a loser do you have to be for your own parents to treat you like that?" They were Jake's friends, guys who'd been at his car party, and they were tearing me apart for their entertainment. The old me would have just taken it, would have felt that shame burning in my chest and walked away. But the new me, the one who understood what real problems looked like, felt something different. A calm, cold clarity. I walked right up to their table and sat down without being invited. "You want to know why I got a bike?" I asked, looking each of them in the eye. "Because my mother had cancer, and my parents spent their last dime keeping her alive instead of buying me a car." You could have heard a pin drop in that cafeteria. The car my brother drives, my parents had already committed to buying it before they knew Mom was sick and they couldn't get out of it. So yeah, I got a bike. And you know what? I'm proud to ride that bike because it means my mother is still here. I stood up, watching the color drain from their faces. Maybe before you judge someone's situation, you should consider that you don't know a damn thing about their life. The story spread through school like wildfire. And suddenly I went from being the kid with the cheap parents to the kid whose family had been through hell and come out stronger. People apologized, offered help, treated me with respect I hadn't experienced before. But the real revenge wasn't against those kids who'd mocked me. It was against the bitterness and resentment that had been poisoning my own heart. I'd been so focused on what I didn't have that I'd almost lost sight of what I did have. A mother who was alive, a father who'd worked himself to the bone for his family, and a brother who'd carried secrets to protect me. The bike that I'd seen as a symbol of being unloved became a symbol of survival, of sacrifice, of family loyalty that ran deeper than material possessions. My relationship with Jake transformed completely after all this came out. We started having real conversations, the kind we hadn't had since we were kids, before high school social hierarchies and different friend groups pulled us apart. He told me how guilty he'd felt every time he drove that car, knowing what I didn't know, watching me hurt and not being able to explain why. "I almost told you 100 times," he admitted one night when we were both in the garage, me working on my bike and him changing his oil. But Mom made me promise, and I didn't want to break that promise when she'd already been through so much. I understood. He'd been stuck between loyalty to our parents and loyalty to me, and there was no good answer to that impossible situation. The months that followed taught me more about life than any class at school ever could. I learned that fairness isn't always about everyone getting the exact same thing. Sometimes it's about everyone getting what they need when they need it most. I learned that parents are human beings who make impossible choices with insufficient resources, trying their best to protect their children even when protection causes its own kind of pain. I learned that material possessions mean absolutely nothing compared to having the people you love still breathing, still fighting, still here. Every time I rode that bike, I thought about my mom's strength, about how she'd endured poison being pumped into her veins so she could stick around to see me graduate, see me grow up, see what kind of man I'd become. Senior year ended, and I graduated with honors, riding my bike to the ceremony with my family following behind in Jake's car. At the graduation party, a small backyard barbecue, nothing fancy, my parents pulled me aside with an envelope. Inside was a check for exactly the amount I'd given them months earlier for the medical bills. "What's this?" I asked, confused. Dad put his hand on my shoulder and explained that they'd been putting aside small amounts from their paychecks, that they wanted me to have that money back to use for college or whatever I needed. "You gave up your car fund to help this family," Mom said, her eyes bright with tears, but smiling this time. "We can't give you back the time you spent earning it, but we can give you back the money." I looked at that check, at my parents' hopeful faces, and I made a decision. "Keep it," I said, folding the check and putting it back in the envelope. "Put it toward the bills, or save it for the next emergency, or take Mom on a vacation when she's strong enough." The look of pure love and relief on their faces was worth more than any amount of money could ever be. I've got a job, I've got scholarships for college, and I've got a perfectly good bike that's taught me more about what matters than a car ever could. We stood there in a group hug, the four of us, and I felt more loved and valued than I ever had standing in front of a shiny new vehicle. College started in the fall, and I commuted from home on that bike for the first semester to save money on dorms. Rain or shine, cold or heat, I pedaled to campus while other kids pulled up in their cars, some of them brand new, paid for by parents who had never faced the choice between buying their kid a car or paying for life-saving medical treatment. I didn't envy them anymore, didn't feel that bitter resentment churning in my gut. Instead, I felt sorry for them, because they'd probably never learn the lessons I'd learned, never understand the difference between surface-level fairness and deep, complicated love. They might have nicer cars, but I had something more valuable, a family that had been tested by fire and had come out stronger on the other side. Mom's health continued to improve, and the medical bills slowly, painfully slowly, began to shrink. Dad's consulting business took off, bringing in extra income that helped cushion the financial stress. Jake got a promotion at his job and started contributing more to the household expenses, insisting it was the least he could do. And me? I kept riding that bike, kept working my part-time job, kept showing up for my family in ways big and small. We became a team in a way we'd never been before, united by hardship into something stronger than we'd been in the comfortable times. By my sophomore year of college, the financial situation had stabilized enough that my parents surprised me with a used car. Nothing fancy, just a reliable Toyota with high mileage that they'd found for a steal. "We know the bike has been good to you," Mom said when they gave me the keys, "but you've earned this, and we want you to have it." I accepted it gratefully, but I kept that bike too, hanging it in my dorm room as a reminder that material things are temporary, that health is precious, that family is everything. and that sometimes what looks like the worst thing that could happen, getting a bike instead of a car, turns out to be exactly what you needed to learn life's most important lessons. Looking back now, years later, I can say with complete honesty that getting that bike was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Not because of the bike itself, but because of everything it represented and everything it taught me. It taught me patience, humility, gratitude, and perspective. It taught me to ask questions before making assumptions, to look beneath the surface of situations before judging them. It taught me that love isn't measured in dollar amounts or the value of gifts, but in sacrifice, in hard choices made with the best intentions, in parents who agonize over how to be fair when circumstances make fairness impossible. The revenge I got wasn't against my parents or my brother. They never deserved my anger in the first place. The revenge was against my own ignorance, against the shallow values that had made me believe a car determined my worth or my parents' love. I destroyed that version of myself, the one who measured love in material terms and built something better in its place. I became someone who understands that when a family is drowning, you don't complain about the life preserver they throw you just because it's not the fancy yacht you expected. You grab hold, you help row, and you're grateful that everyone made it to shore together. So yeah, my parents gave my brother a car and gave me a bike, and I found out why. The why changed everything, changed how I saw my family, changed how I saw myself, changed what I valued in life. That bike is still in my garage today, even though I don't ride it much anymore. I keep it as a monument to the year I grew up, the year I learned that the best gifts aren't things you can drive or spend, but moments of understanding, acts of sacrifice, and the precious gift of time with the people you love. If I could go back and change that 18th birthday, get the car instead of the bike, I wouldn't do it. Because that bike, as simple and humble as it was, gave me something far more valuable than transportation. It gave me wisdom, gratitude, and a family bond that's strong enough to survive anything.